The Map of Achievement. Welcome to Audiobook Sounds, Chasing Greatness, a space created for people who are quietly ambitious, deeply thoughtful, and aware that there is more potential within them than their current circumstances may reflect. And as you settle into this audiobook, I want you to relax your mind, slow your breathing, and allow yourself to listen without pressure, because this is not a place for noise, urgency, or empty motivation, but a place for clarity, direction, and deliberate growth. Whether this is your first time here or you have been part of this channel for some time, you are welcome, and I encourage you to stay connected by engaging with the channel and subscribing, because every audiobook shared here is carefully designed to help you think more clearly, move with intention, and continue chasing greatness even during moments when doubt, fatigue, or confusion begin to creep in. You do not need to change everything at once, and you do not need to have all the answers immediately, because clarity unfolds gradually when attention is focused in the right direction, and progress naturally follows. So allow this audiobook to guide your thinking, anchor your focus, and provide direction where confusion once existed, because achievement is not about pushing harder in the dark, but about navigating wisely with intention and awareness. This is not motivation designed to fade when life becomes difficult, but a framework meant to stay with you as you continue moving forward, adjusting your path, and growing into the person you are capable of becoming. This is the Map of Achievement, and this is where your journey begins. Chapter 1. Where you are self-awareness. Before any real achievement can begin, before goals can be set with confidence or progress can be measured with honesty, there is one uncomfortable but necessary step that most people avoid, and that step is understanding exactly where they are right now, not where they wish they were, not where they pretend to be, and not where they believe they should already have reached by this point in their life. Self-awareness is not about criticism or self-judgment, but about clarity, because movement without clarity leads to confusion, and confusion eventually leads to frustration, no matter how talented, disciplined, or ambitious a person may be, which is why so many people remain busy yet stagnant, active yet unfulfilled, and exhausted without any real sense of progress. Many people attempt to change their lives by focusing immediately on goals, habits, or motivation without first taking the time to understand their current mental position, emotional patterns, and daily behaviors, which is similar to trying to follow directions without knowing your starting point, because no matter how accurate the route may be, it becomes useless if you do not know where you are standing. Where you are is not just defined by your circumstances, but by your thinking, your routines, your emotional responses, and the stories you repeatedly tell yourself about what is possible, what is difficult, and what you believe you deserve, because these internal patterns quietly shape the direction of your life long before results appear on the surface. Most people avoid honest self-assessment because it forces them to confront truths they would rather ignore, such as wasted time, unexamined habits, unresolved fears, or decisions made out of comfort rather than intention. Yet without this honesty, growth remains shallow and inconsistent, since you cannot correct what you refuse to acknowledge. Self-awareness requires the courage to observe your life without excuses, without exaggeration, and without comparison, which means recognizing not only what is going wrong, but also what is working, because understanding your strengths is just as important as identifying your limitations, and both are necessary for accurate navigation. At this stage of the journey, it is essential to pause and reflect on how you currently spend your time, how you react to discomfort, how you handle responsibility, and how you respond when progress feels slow, because these patterns reveal far more about your direction than your intentions ever will. You may believe that you are stuck because of external circumstances, such as lack of opportunity, lack of support, or lack of resources, yet when you look deeper, you often discover that internal patterns such as avoidance, inconsistency, overthinking, or fear of failure have been quietly influencing your choices, shaping your outcomes, and limiting your movement without your conscious awareness. This is not an accusation, but an invitation to clarity, because every person carries blind spots that distort how they see themselves and their progress, and growth begins not when those blind spots disappear, but when they are acknowledged and understood. Knowing where you are also means understanding your emotional baseline, including how often you feel anxious, distracted, resentful, hopeful, or calm, because emotions act as internal signals that reveal whether your current path is aligned with your values or quietly draining your energy over time. When people lack self-awareness, they often confuse motion with progress, mistaking busyness for productivity and stress for purpose, which leads them to chase goals that look impressive but feel empty, while ignoring the internal misalignment that slowly erodes motivation and clarity. True self-awareness allows you to separate who you are from what you have been doing, which is important because behaviors can be changed, habits can be rebuilt, and direction can be corrected, but only when you stop identifying yourself with past mistakes or current limitations. At this point in the journey, it is not necessary to judge whether your current position is good or bad, ahead or behind, because judgment clouds perception, while clarity sharpens it, and the purpose of this chapter is not to label your situation, but to help you see it clearly enough to move forward deliberately. Understanding where you are means acknowledging your current level of discipline, your relationship with focus, your tolerance for discomfort, and your consistency over time, because achievement is not built on occasional effort, but on repeated behaviors that compound slowly and quietly. It also means recognizing the narratives you repeat internally, such as believing you need more time, more confidence, or more motivation before you begin, because these narratives often delay action while disguising themselves as preparation. When you develop self-awareness, you stop negotiating with excuses and start responding with intention, because clarity removes the emotional fog that makes simple decisions feel overwhelming and straightforward progress feel complicated. This stage of the map is about grounding yourself in reality, not to limit your ambition, but to stabilize it, because ambition without grounding leads to burnout, while ambition anchored in awareness leads to sustainable progress. Once you clearly understand where you are, your goals become more realistic, your strategies become more effective, and your expectations become healthier, because you are no longer chasing an imagined version of yourself, but building from a real and solid foundation. As you move forward from this chapter, carry with you the understanding that self-awareness is not a one-time exercise, but a continuous practice, because as you grow, your position changes, and clarity must be renewed to keep your direction accurate. You are not behind, broken, or incapable, but simply at a specific point on your journey, and once that point is clearly identified, movement becomes easier, decisions become simpler, and progress becomes measurable. This is where achievement truly begins, not with motivation or speed, but with honest orientation, because once you know where you are, the map finally becomes useful, and the journey forward can begin with confidence and intention. Chapter 2. Where you're going, your vision. Once you have taken the time to understand where you are, without denial, exaggeration, or judgment, the next essential step in the map of achievement is defining where you are going, because movement without a destination may feel active, but it rarely leads to fulfillment, and effort without direction eventually drains energy instead of creating progress. Vision is not fantasy or wishful thinking, but clarity, because a clear vision gives structure to effort, filters distractions, and turns daily decisions into intentional steps rather than emotional reactions, which is why people with strong vision often appear calm and focused even during uncertainty, while those without it feel overwhelmed despite having fewer responsibilities. Many people believe they have a vision, yet when asked to describe it, they offer vague answers filled with general desires such as wanting to be successful, happy, or financially free, without defining what those words actually mean in practical, lived terms, and without clarity, the mind has nothing concrete to aim toward, causing motivation to rise and fall unpredictably. A real vision is specific enough to guide behavior, but flexible enough to grow with experience, because it is not about predicting every detail of the future, but about establishing a clear direction that aligns with your values, strengths, and desired way of living, allowing you to make decisions with confidence even when outcomes remain uncertain. When vision is unclear, people tend to chase what looks impressive to others, adopt goals that are socially acceptable but personally empty, or constantly shift directions in search of something that feels right, which results in fragmented effort and the quiet frustration of always starting but rarely finishing. Defining where you are going requires honesty, patience, and self-respect, because it forces you to separate what you truly want from what you have been conditioned to want, and this distinction is uncomfortable for many people, since it may require letting go of goals that no longer fit who they are becoming. Vision is not built by comparing yourself to others, because comparison distorts perception and pulls attention away from your own path, replacing clarity with pressure, and pressure leads to decisions made out of fear rather than intention, which often results in regret rather than fulfillment. To understand where you are going, you must consider not only what you want to achieve, but how you want to live, how you want to feel on a daily basis, and what kind of person you are willing to become in the process, because achievement that requires you to abandon your values or sacrifice your well-being is not success, but misalignment. A clear vision gives meaning to discipline, because discipline without purpose feels like punishment, while discipline connected to vision feels like self-respect, and this shift changes how you approach discomfort, delays, and effort over time. Without vision, distractions feel tempting because there is no clear reason to resist them, yet when your direction is defined, distractions lose their power, because every unnecessary action becomes clearly visible as something that moves you away from where you intend to go. Vision also acts as an internal compass during uncertainty, because when outcomes are unclear and progress feels slow, direction becomes more important than speed, and clarity keeps you moving forward without constantly questioning whether you are wasting your time. Many people delay defining their vision because they fear choosing incorrectly, yet refusing to choose is itself a decision, and often the most costly one, because time passes regardless, and directionless movement quietly compounds regret. It is important to understand that vision does not require certainty, but commitment, because clarity is refined through action, not contemplation, and direction becomes sharper as you move, reflect, and adjust based on experience rather than imagination. A meaningful vision is grounded in reality, yet inspired by possibility, because it respects your current position while inviting growth, allowing you to stretch without breaking and progress without constant self-conflict. As you clarify where you are going, you begin to notice that your priorities shift, your tolerance for meaningless activity decreases, and your focus naturally sharpens, not because life becomes easier, but because decisions become simpler. Vision transforms time from something that slips away into something that is invested intentionally, because when direction is clear, each day becomes an opportunity to move forward rather than something to merely survive. It also reshapes your relationship with patience, because instead of expecting immediate results, you begin to trust the process, knowing that consistent movement in the right direction eventually creates outcomes that sporadic effort never could. When vision is aligned with who you are, motivation becomes less emotional and more stable, because it is no longer dependent on mood or inspiration, but anchored in meaning and purpose. This stage of the map is not about pressure or perfection, but about orientation, because once your direction is defined, even small actions feel significant and progress becomes visible over time. As you move forward from this chapter, understand that vision is not something you define once and never revisit, but something that evolves as you grow, gain clarity, and refine your understanding of yourself and the world around you. Knowing where you are going does not eliminate challenges, but it gives those challenges context, turning obstacles into feedback rather than reasons to quit. When direction is clear, effort becomes intentional, discipline becomes sustainable, and achievement stops feeling accidental and begins to feel earned. This is the power of vision within the map of achievement, because when you know where you are going, every step gains meaning, and the journey forward becomes not only possible but purposeful. Chapter 3. The Roads. Habits and Systems. Once you understand where you are and have defined where you are going, the next part of the map of achievement is identifying the roads that will take you there, because vision without structure remains imagination, and clarity without systems eventually collapses under the weight of daily life. The roads are not dramatic breakthroughs or moments of inspiration, but the quiet, repeated behaviors you return to each day, because achievement is rarely the result of one powerful decision, but rather the outcome of many small decisions made consistently over time, often without recognition or excitement. Many people believe that success is built through motivation, yet motivation is unstable and unreliable, rising and falling with mood, energy, and circumstance, while habits and systems operate regardless of how you feel, which is why disciplined individuals continue progressing even when enthusiasm fades. A habit is a repeated action, but a system is the structure that makes that action inevitable, because systems remove friction, reduce decision fatigue, and guide behavior automatically, allowing progress to continue even during moments of doubt, distraction, or exhaustion. When people rely only on willpower, they place unnecessary pressure on themselves, forcing effort to compete with comfort, distraction, and fatigue every single day, whereas systems create an environment where the right actions become easier and the wrong actions become less appealing. The roads to achievement are built through intentional routines, clear standards, and consistent follow-through, not because these elements are exciting, but because they create stability, and stability allows growth to compound quietly over time. Many people overestimate what they can accomplish in a short period and underestimate what they can achieve through small, consistent actions applied patiently, which leads them to abandon habits prematurely when results do not appear quickly enough. Habits are powerful not because of their size, but because of their direction, since even the smallest action, when repeated daily, reinforces an identity, and over time, identity shapes behavior more strongly than motivation ever could. When your habits align with your vision, progress feels natural, but when they contradict it, effort feels forced, because internal conflict drains energy faster than hard work ever will. It is important to understand that habits do not exist in isolation, but are influenced by your environment, your schedule, and your emotional patterns, which is why sustainable systems are designed intentionally rather than left to chance. If your environment encourages distraction, inconsistency, and comfort, your habits will reflect that environment, no matter how strong your intentions may be. But when your environment supports focus, discipline, and clarity, progress becomes easier to maintain. The roads of achievement require you to design your days with awareness, because how you start your morning, how you manage your attention, and how you recover after setbacks all contribute to the direction of your life more than occasional bursts of effort. Systems also protect you during difficult periods, because when life becomes unpredictable, habits provide structure, grounding you in familiar actions that keep you moving forward even when circumstances feel uncertain. Many people abandon progress when routines are disrupted, believing they have failed, yet successful individuals understand that consistency does not mean perfection, but return, because the ability to resume a habit matters far more than the ability to maintain it flawlessly. The purpose of systems is not to restrict freedom, but to create it, because when essential actions are automated, mental energy is freed for creativity, problem-solving, and growth rather than wasted on constant decision-making. The roads you build today determine the ease or difficulty of your journey tomorrow, because habits compound quietly, shaping results long before they become visible, and by the time outcomes appear, the direction was already decided through repeated behavior. It is also important to recognize that not all habits are equal, because some habits act as keystone behaviors that influence multiple areas of your life at once, such as consistent sleep, focused work, intentional learning, and regular reflection. When these foundational habits are in place, other positive behaviors follow naturally, but when they are neglected, progress becomes fragmented and unstable. Systems must evolve as you grow, because what supports progress at one stage may limit it at another, which is why self-awareness and reflection remain essential throughout the journey. The goal is not to build rigid routines that break under pressure, but flexible systems that adapt while maintaining direction, allowing you to adjust your pace without losing your path. As you continue along the map of achievement, understand that the roads you choose will not always be smooth or visible, but consistency turns uncertainty into familiarity, and familiarity builds confidence over time. Habits do not change your life overnight, but they quietly shape who you become, and who you become eventually determines what you achieve. This chapter exists to remind you that achievement is not built through intensity alone, but through direction repeated patiently, because when the roads are clear and the systems are sound, progress becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Chapter 4. The Obstacles, Resistance and Fear. As you move forward on the path of achievement, having understood where you are, clarified where you are going, and begun building the roads through habits and systems, you will inevitably encounter obstacles, not as signs that something is wrong, but as confirmation that you are moving in the right direction, because resistance only appears when growth is taking place. Many people misunderstand obstacles and interpret difficulty as failure, yet in reality, resistance is the natural response of the mind when it is asked to leave familiar patterns and step into uncertainty, which is why fear often shows up precisely at moments of potential progress rather than moments of stagnation. Resistance does not always appear as panic or obvious fear, but often disguises itself as procrastination, distraction, overthinking, perfectionism, or the sudden urge to delay action until conditions feel more favorable, even though those conditions rarely arrive. The mind seeks comfort, predictability, and safety, and when you attempt to change your direction, even in positive ways, it reacts by pulling you back toward what feels familiar, because familiarity is interpreted as safety, regardless of whether it is beneficial or limiting. Fear, in this context, is not a sign of weakness, but a signal that you are approaching the edge of your current identity, because growth requires you to act before you feel ready, and the mind resists actions that challenge its existing self-image. Many people wait for fear to disappear before taking action, believing confidence must come first, yet confidence is not a prerequisite for progress, but a result of it, because confidence is built through repeated exposure to discomfort rather than avoidance of it. When resistance appears, people often personalize it, believing something is wrong with them, rather than recognizing it as a universal experience shared by anyone attempting to improve their life, which leads to unnecessary self-criticism and retreat. Obstacles also reveal attachment to outcomes, because fear intensifies when success feels like it defines your worth, making mistakes feel dangerous rather than instructive, and progress feels heavy rather than exploratory. Understanding resistance allows you to respond rather than react, because when you expect obstacles, they lose their power to surprise or discourage you, and instead become indicators that you are navigating meaningful territory. Fear is often rooted in imagined futures rather than present realities, because the mind projects worst-case scenarios in an attempt to protect you, even though those scenarios are rarely accurate representations of what will actually occur. When you allow fear to dictate your actions, you sacrifice long-term fulfillment for short-term comfort, yet when you acknowledge fear without obeying it, you reclaim authority over your direction and reinforce self-trust. Resistance becomes stronger when goals are unclear or habits are inconsistent, because uncertainty amplifies doubt, which is why clarity and systems serve as stabilizers during moments of emotional turbulence. It is important to recognize that obstacles are not meant to be eliminated, but navigated, because a path without resistance would not produce growth, discipline, or resilience, and achievement without challenge would lack depth and meaning. Every obstacle you encounter offers information, revealing where your systems need strengthening, where expectations need adjustment, and where internal narratives require examination. Some resistance is internal, appearing as self-doubt or fear of inadequacy, while other resistance is external, appearing as criticism, rejection, or lack of support, yet both forms test your commitment rather than your capability. External obstacles often expose the need for boundaries, patience, and persistence, while internal obstacles challenge your identity and force you to redefine who you believe yourself to be. Fear diminishes when action becomes familiar, because repetition reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is the fuel fear feeds on, which is why small, consistent steps are more effective than dramatic attempts at transformation. Progress does not require the absence of fear, but the willingness to act alongside it, because courage is not a personality trait, but a behavior repeated until it becomes natural. When resistance arises, it is helpful to return to your vision and systems rather than attempting to reason with emotion, because emotion fluctuates, but direction remains stable when clarity is intact. Avoiding obstacles delays growth, but engaging them thoughtfully accelerates self-awareness, because difficulty forces you to refine your approach and deepen your understanding. Many people turn back at the first sign of resistance, mistaking discomfort for danger, yet those who continue learn that fear often loses intensity once action is taken, revealing itself as a temporary barrier rather than a permanent limit. Obstacles shape character as much as outcomes, because they teach patience, adaptability, and humility, qualities that sustain achievement long after initial goals are reached. The purpose of this stage of the map is not to harden you or desensitize you, but to teach you how to move forward without internal conflict, allowing fear to exist without allowing it to decide your direction. When resistance is approached with awareness rather than avoidance, it becomes less intimidating and more instructional, guiding you toward growth rather than away from it. As you continue on the path of achievement, understand that obstacles are not interruptions, but part of the route itself, shaping your capacity to handle responsibility, success, and continued growth. Fear will appear again at higher levels, but with experience, you learn that fear does not mean stop, but pay attention, because attention allows you to move wisely rather than impulsively. This chapter exists to remind you that resistance is not your enemy, but a companion on the journey, signaling that you are expanding beyond old limits and stepping into unfamiliar territory. When you no longer interpret obstacles as proof of inadequacy, but as confirmation of progress, your relationship with difficulty changes, and forward movement becomes steadier and more intentional. This is how obstacles lose their power, not by disappearing, but by being understood, navigated, and integrated into the journey toward achievement. Chapter 5. The Compass, Discipline. As you continue moving along the map of achievement, having faced obstacles, resistance, and fear, you will come to understand that progress cannot rely on emotion, mood, or circumstance, because these forces are unstable by nature, and this is where discipline becomes essential, not as punishment or restriction, but as the compass that keeps you oriented when motivation fades and clarity feels distant. Discipline is often misunderstood as harshness or force, yet true discipline is not about controlling yourself through pressure, but about guiding yourself through commitment, because discipline exists to protect your direction, not to make your journey more difficult. When motivation is present, action feels easy and natural, but when motivation disappears, which it always does, discipline becomes the quiet decision to continue moving according to your values rather than your feelings, and this decision is what separates consistent progress from repeated restarts. A compass does not remove obstacles or shorten the journey, but it provides direction regardless of conditions, and discipline functions the same way, allowing you to move forward even when progress feels slow, uncertain, or uncomfortable. Many people wait to feel ready before acting, believing readiness is emotional, yet readiness is behavioral, because you become ready by showing up consistently rather than waiting for confidence to arrive. Discipline is built through repetition, not intensity, because small commitments kept daily strengthen self-trust far more than dramatic efforts followed by long periods of inconsistency. Each time you follow through on a commitment, no matter how small, you reinforce the belief that you can rely on yourself, and self-reliance is the foundation of confidence, stability, and long-term achievement. Without discipline, vision becomes fragile, systems collapse under pressure, and fear gains influence, because emotion fills the space where structure should exist. Discipline does not eliminate emotion, but it prevents emotion from controlling direction, allowing you to acknowledge how you feel without allowing feelings to determine your actions. When discipline is absent, decisions become reactive, shaped by comfort, avoidance, or external influence. But when discipline is present, decisions are intentional, guided by long-term direction rather than short-term relief. The role of discipline is not to demand perfection, but consistency, because perfection leads to rigidity and burnout, while consistency allows flexibility without loss of direction. Discipline also teaches patience, because it shifts focus from immediate outcomes to long-term progress, reminding you that achievement is not a single event, but the accumulation of aligned actions over time. Many people associate discipline with restriction, yet discipline actually creates freedom, because when essential actions are non-negotiable, mental energy is freed from constant deliberation, allowing clarity, creativity, and presence to grow. A disciplined mind is not a rigid mind, but a grounded one, capable of adapting without losing focus, because discipline anchors behavior even when circumstances change. Discipline becomes especially important during periods when progress is invisible, because results often lag behind effort, and without a compass, people mistake the absence of immediate feedback for failure. The ability to continue without reassurance is a skill developed through disciplined action, because discipline teaches you to trust the process even when outcomes are delayed. Discipline also strengthens your relationship with discomfort, not by eliminating it, but by normalizing it, allowing effort to feel familiar rather than threatening. As discipline grows, resistance weakens, not because challenges disappear, but because your response becomes steadier, less emotional, and more intentional. A disciplined person does not rely on external validation to continue, because their commitment is internal, guided by direction rather than approval. Discipline is not built overnight, but through small promises honored consistently, and each fulfilled promise becomes evidence that you are capable of sustaining effort over time. When discipline guides your actions, setbacks lose their ability to derail you, because direction remains intact even when progress slows. Discipline also clarifies priorities, because when time and energy are limited, discipline ensures they are invested where they matter most, rather than scattered across distractions. As you move forward on the map of achievement, understand that discipline is not something you either have or lack, but something you practice daily, refining it through repetition and reflection. The compass of discipline does not guarantee speed, but it guarantees direction, and direction maintained over time inevitably leads to progress. When motivation fades, discipline carries you forward, and when discipline is strong, achievement becomes sustainable rather than accidental. This chapter exists to remind you that discipline is not about forcing yourself to become someone else, but about honoring the direction you have already chosen, even when the journey challenges your patience. With discipline as your compass, you are no longer at the mercy of mood or circumstance, but guided by intention, clarity, and commitment. This is how progress becomes steady, identity becomes stronger, and achievement becomes a natural outcome of aligned action rather than a distant hope. Chapter 6: Our Routing, Failure and Adjustment. No matter how clearly a direction is chosen, no matter how disciplined the effort becomes, and no matter how intentional the progress feels, every journey will eventually encounter resistance, delay, misjudgment, or failure, because growth does not unfold in a straight line, and achievement is shaped as much by adjustment as it is by movement. Failure is not evidence that the map is wrong, but information that something requires recalibration, because even the most accurate direction must respond to changing terrain, unexpected obstacles, and evolving conditions. Many people abandon their path not because they lack discipline or clarity, but because they misinterpret failure as a verdict rather than a signal, allowing disappointment to replace awareness. Rerouting is the ability to pause without quitting, to reassess without retreating, and to adjust without losing direction, which requires maturity, patience, and emotional regulation rather than force. When failure occurs, the instinct is often to react emotionally, either by doubling down blindly or withdrawing completely, yet both responses ignore the opportunity hidden within disruption. Failure exposes assumptions, reveals weaknesses in systems, and highlights areas where alignment has drifted, offering insight that success alone cannot provide. Those who progress consistently are not those who avoid failure, but those who extract information from it quickly and respond deliberately rather than impulsively. Rerouting begins with honesty, because adjustment cannot occur if reality is avoided, minimized, or distorted to protect ego. Honest assessment requires separating identity from outcome, understanding that failure reflects a strategy, a decision, or a condition, not personal worth. When identity becomes attached to outcomes, failure feels threatening, yet when identity is grounded in effort and integrity, failure becomes instructive rather than destructive. Rerouting also requires humility, because growth demands acknowledging that initial plans may be incomplete, flawed, or outdated, even when effort was sincere. Humility allows learning to replace defensiveness, and learning restores momentum without sacrificing self-respect. Adjustment is not weakness, but intelligence applied in motion, because rigid persistence in the wrong direction creates exhaustion without progress. The map of achievement was never meant to eliminate failure, but to provide a framework for responding to it without panic or collapse. Rerouting often involves small changes rather than dramatic pivots, such as refining habits, altering timelines, improving systems, or recalibrating expectations, yet these subtle shifts can restore alignment powerfully over time. Patience becomes essential during rerouting because adjustment may temporarily slow visible progress, even though it strengthens long-term sustainability. This is where many people quit prematurely, mistaking slower progress for stagnation, rather than recognizing it as recalibration. Rerouting teaches emotional resilience, because it requires staying present with discomfort without allowing frustration to dictate decisions. It also teaches discernment, because not every obstacle requires a change in direction and not every setback indicates failure, but awareness helps distinguish between resistance that strengthens and resistance that signals misalignment. The ability to reroute effectively depends on reflection, because reflection turns experience into guidance rather than repetition. Without reflection, failure repeats itself, yet with reflection, failure evolves into refinement. Rerouting also protects against burnout, because it allows effort to remain sustainable rather than excessive, and progress to remain intentional rather than reactive. When adjustment is embraced, confidence deepens, not because outcomes improve immediately, but because self-trust grows through demonstrated adaptability. You begin to realize that uncertainty does not require urgency, and that clarity can be restored through thoughtful reassessment rather than emotional reaction. Rerouting keeps you engaged with the journey rather than trapped by expectation, because it allows goals to evolve while preserving direction. It also reinforces the understanding that progress is measured not only by advancement, but by resilience, recovery, and continuation. Failure, when integrated correctly, becomes a stabilizing force rather than a destabilizing one, because it strengthens awareness and sharpens judgment. The map remains useful precisely because it accommodates adjustment, reminding you that deviation is not defeat unless it becomes abandonment. Rerouting does not erase progress already made, but builds upon it, because every experience contributes information that strengthens future decisions. This chapter exists to remind you that the ability to adjust without quitting is one of the most important skills in achievement, because life will always demand flexibility, awareness, and patience. Those who succeed long-term are not those who never fail, but those who refuse to let failure disconnect them from direction. Rerouting is how momentum is restored, alignment is protected, and growth remains honest rather than forced. And as you move forward, understand that every adjustment made with awareness strengthens the map, not weakens it, because the journey becomes wiser with every recalibration. This is how failure transforms into guidance, how setbacks become refinement, and how progress continues even when the path changes. Chapter 7. Arrival is a process. After learning how to reroute through failure, adjust without quitting, and remain flexible without losing direction, it becomes necessary to understand the final truth on the map of achievement, which is that arrival is not a single moment of completion, but an ongoing process of alignment, awareness, and refinement that continues long after any goal is reached. Many people imagine arrival as a finish line where effort ends, uncertainty disappears, and fulfillment becomes permanent. Yet this belief often leads to disappointment, because no external milestone can permanently satisfy an internal need for meaning, growth, and direction. Arrival is not defined by reaching a specific position, income level, title, or outcome, but by the consistency with which your actions align with your values, your direction, and your sense of purpose. Because when alignment is present, progress feels grounded rather than frantic. Those who struggle after success often do so because they treated achievement as an escape rather than a process, expecting outcomes to solve internal discontent, rather than understanding that achievement amplifies who you are rather than replacing what is missing. When arrival is misunderstood, people rush through their journey, sacrificing awareness for speed, and once they reach their destination, they feel disoriented rather than fulfilled, because they prepared themselves to chase, but not to arrive consciously. True arrival occurs in moments of clarity, presence, and intentional living, where effort feels meaningful rather than forced, and progress feels integrated rather than separate from your identity. Achievement becomes sustainable when you stop measuring success solely by outcomes and begin evaluating it through stability, discipline, and internal coherence, because what you maintain matters more than what you reach briefly. Arrival does not remove struggle, but it changes your relationship with it, because challenges no longer feel like threats to your worth, but signals that growth is continuing at a deeper level. As you evolve, your definition of success must also evolve, because clinging to outdated goals limits growth, while refinement keeps direction relevant and aligned with who you are becoming. Those who understand arrival as a process are less reactive, less rushed, and more grounded, because they no longer expect fulfillment to appear suddenly, but allow it to develop through consistency and awareness. This understanding reduces comparison, because you stop measuring your progress against someone else's timeline and begin honoring your own rhythm, values, and pace. Arrival teaches patience, because it reveals that meaningful progress compounds quietly, often without external recognition, and that visibility is not a reliable measure of depth or direction. It also teaches humility, because each level reached reveals new areas of learning, adjustment, and responsibility, reminding you that growth is continuous rather than final. When arrival is treated as a process, discipline remains relevant, habits remain necessary, and reflection remains essential, because growth requires maintenance as much as effort. Many people lose their way after achieving initial success because they abandon the systems that brought them there, believing effort is no longer required, yet alignment dissolves when structure is removed. Arrival does not mean you stop navigating, but that you navigate with greater awareness, confidence, and self-trust, because experience sharpens judgment and deepens clarity. The greatest benefit of achievement is not comfort, recognition, or security, but the internal stability that comes from knowing you can move forward deliberately, adjust intelligently, and remain grounded regardless of circumstance. When you arrive consciously, you no longer chase endlessly, because you are present within your progress, able to appreciate growth without needing it to prove your worth. Arrival becomes a state of being rather than a place, where effort is guided, direction is clear, and identity is stable, even as goals continue to evolve. This chapter exists to remind you that achievement is not something you finish, but something you live, expressed through daily decisions, sustained discipline, and ongoing reflection. You do not arrive once and remain there forever, but arrive repeatedly, each time with greater clarity, patience, and depth, as long as you continue to realign with what matters. The map of achievement does not end here, because clarity must be renewed, discipline must be practiced, and awareness must be protected in a world that constantly pulls attention away from intention. What you now carry forward is not motivation, but understanding, not urgency, but direction, and not pressure, but alignment, which allows progress to feel steady rather than chaotic. When arrival is understood as a process, fear loses its urgency, failure loses its sting, and progress gains meaning, because everything becomes part of the journey rather than a verdict on your worth. This is how achievement becomes sustainable, grounded, and deeply personal, not defined by a single moment, but by the way you continue to live, decide, and move forward with intention. This is the final truth on the map of achievement, and with it, you are not ending a journey, but continuing one with clarity, patience, and self-trust. Chapter 8. Living the Map Daily. After understanding that arrival is not a destination but a process, the final responsibility becomes learning how to live the map daily, because clarity that is not practiced eventually fades, and awareness that is not applied slowly dissolves into intention without direction. The map of achievement is not meant to be admired intellectually, but used practically, guiding decisions, shaping habits, and grounding you when distractions, pressure, or doubt attempt to pull you off course. Living the map daily begins with awareness, because awareness keeps you honest about where you are, what you are avoiding, and what requires attention, allowing adjustment before misalignment becomes regret. Each day presents small decisions that quietly determine direction, and while these decisions may seem insignificant in isolation, they compound into patterns that either reinforce clarity or create confusion. The map reminds you that consistency is more powerful than intensity, because intensity burns quickly, while consistency reshapes identity gradually and sustainably. Living with intention does not mean controlling every outcome, but choosing responses deliberately, especially in moments of uncertainty, frustration, or delay. Discipline, when lived daily, is no longer rigid or forceful, but supportive, providing structure that protects progress rather than restricting freedom. The map teaches that habits are not tasks to complete, but agreements you make with your future self, honoring long-term alignment over short-term comfort. When distractions arise, which they inevitably will, the map helps you return rather than restart, reminding you that deviation is not failure unless it becomes abandonment. Living the map daily also means accepting that some days will feel clear and productive, while others will feel slow and resistant, yet both are part of the same process of growth. Progress does not require constant confidence, but continued movement, even when certainty is absent, because direction is strengthened through action rather than waiting. The map becomes most valuable during moments of doubt, when external validation is absent, results are delayed, and effort feels unseen, because it offers internal guidance rather than external reassurance. Living deliberately requires patience, because meaningful change often occurs beneath the surface long before it becomes visible, and impatience interrupts processes that need time to mature. The map also protects you from comparison, because it reminds you that your path is shaped by your values, circumstances, and purpose, not someone else's timeline or highlight reel. When lived daily, the map encourages reflection, not as criticism, but as calibration, allowing you to learn from experience without attaching identity to outcomes. Reflection turns effort into insight, and insight into wisdom, which guides future decisions with greater clarity and confidence. Living the map daily means remaining flexible without losing direction, adapting to change while staying anchored to what matters. It also means understanding that rest is not a deviation from progress, but a requirement for sustainability, because exhaustion distorts judgment and weakens discipline. The map allows you to measure success not by how much you accomplish in a day, but by how aligned your actions are with your values and direction. Over time, living this way builds internal stability, because your sense of worth becomes grounded in effort and integrity rather than outcomes and recognition. This stability creates resilience, allowing you to move forward without panic during setbacks and without arrogance during success. Living the map daily transforms achievement from a pursuit into a lifestyle, where growth feels integrated rather than forced, and progress feels natural rather than pressured. You begin to trust yourself more, not because everything works perfectly, but because you know how to adjust, recover, and continue with intention. The map does not promise ease, but it offers coherence, allowing life to feel connected rather than fragmented, even during complexity. As days turn into weeks, and weeks into seasons, you may notice subtle changes in how you think, decide, and respond, realizing that growth has been occurring quietly, without dramatic announcements. This is the true power of living the map daily, because transformation becomes stable, repeatable, and deeply personal. You no longer need constant motivation, because clarity sustains movement and discipline supports consistency. Living the map daily is not about perfection, but presence, returning again and again to what matters, even when distractions feel loud. And as you continue forward, understand that the map is always available, not as a rigid instruction, but as a guide you can revisit, refine, and rely on whenever direction feels uncertain. This is how achievement becomes lived rather than chased, embodied rather than imagined, and sustained rather than temporary. This chapter exists to remind you that growth happens where intention meets action, repeated quietly, daily, and deliberately. And as you continue living the map, you are no longer searching for direction, because direction now lives within you. Chapter 9: Continuation and Legacy. After learning how to live the map daily, the journey naturally extends beyond personal growth into something deeper, because achievement that remains inward eventually feels incomplete, while growth that contributes outward gains lasting meaning. Continuation is the understanding that progress does not end with comfort, clarity, or stability, but carries forward through influence, example, and the way you move through the world once direction becomes steady. Legacy is not about recognition, status, or being remembered by many, but about the quality of impact left behind through consistency, integrity, and the standards you quietly uphold. Most people imagine legacy as something built later in life, yet legacy is shaped daily, through choices made when no one is watching, and through the way effort, discipline, and awareness are practiced consistently over time. When you live the map intentionally, your actions begin to model clarity for others, even without explanation, because alignment communicates more powerfully than instruction. Continuation means understanding that your growth creates pathways for others, whether through leadership, example, or presence, reminding them that progress does not require chaos, pressure, or urgency. Achievement gains depth when it becomes shared, not through teaching perfection, but through demonstrating resilience, adaptability, and patience in real time. Legacy is built when you choose long-term integrity over short-term validation, because what you maintain consistently defines your influence more than what you achieve briefly. The map of achievement, once internalized, becomes a quiet guide not only for your decisions, but for how you treat challenges, setbacks, and people along the way. Continuation also requires humility, because growth that lasts recognizes that learning never ends, and that wisdom expands through openness rather than certainty. When humility guides progress, legacy remains flexible rather than fragile, allowing growth to evolve rather than collapse under pressure. Continuation means remaining committed to refinement, even after progress feels stable, because stagnation often hides behind comfort disguised as success. The greatest danger after clarity is complacency, because comfort can slowly erode discipline if awareness is not maintained. Legacy requires sustainability, because influence that exhausts itself cannot be carried forward, and achievement that damages well-being eventually loses meaning. Living with legacy in mind does not mean sacrificing the present, but honoring it, understanding that the way you live now shapes the future you pass forward. When you choose patience over urgency, clarity over noise, and alignment over comparison, you create space for others to do the same. Continuation also means allowing your map to evolve, because values deepen, priorities shift, and purpose refines as life changes, and rigidity limits growth. The map remains relevant not because it is fixed, but because it adapts while preserving direction, allowing progress to remain intentional rather than reactive. Legacy is built through repetition, not moments, and through presence, not performance, because consistency leaves deeper marks than intensity. The influence of a grounded individual extends beyond words, because calm, clarity, and self-trust create environments where others feel steadier and more capable. Continuation reminds you that your journey matters not only because of where it leads you, but because of how it shapes the spaces and people you encounter along the way. The map of achievement does not ask you to be extraordinary, but to be consistent, intentional, and honest, because these qualities compound into meaningful impact over time. As this chapter closes, understand that you are not being asked to carry responsibility for others, but to carry responsibility for alignment, knowing that alignment naturally influences beyond itself. Legacy is not built by force, but by example, and not by urgency, but by endurance. Continuation is the quiet decision to keep moving forward with clarity, even when recognition fades and effort becomes routine. This is how achievement becomes timeless rather than temporary, and how growth extends beyond the individual into something lasting and meaningful. The map does not end with you, because direction, once lived, naturally continues forward. And as you carry this map into the future, know that every step taken with intention contributes to something greater than a single destination, because growth that is lived deliberately always leaves a trace. This is continuation, this is legacy, and this is how the map of achievement remains alive. Chapter 10. The Quiet Beginning. After everything that has been explored, clarified, and integrated, the journey does not end with a dramatic conclusion, but with a quiet beginning, because the most meaningful transformations rarely announce themselves loudly and instead unfold through steady, deliberate continuation. The quiet beginning is the moment when you stop seeking permission to move forward, stop waiting for certainty to appear, and stop expecting clarity to arrive fully formed, because you now understand that clarity is built through action rather than discovered through thought alone. There is no urgency here, no pressure to prove progress, and no need to compare direction, because growth that is aligned does not rush, and achievement that is sustainable does not demand constant validation. This beginning is quiet because it is internal, marked by a subtle shift in how you think, decide, and respond, rather than by visible milestones or dramatic change. You begin to trust your judgment more, not because it is flawless, but because you know how to adjust, reflect, and continue without losing direction. The map you now carry is not something you consult only during uncertainty, but something embedded into how you live, guiding small choices that shape long-term outcomes. The quiet beginning is where effort feels purposeful rather than forced, and where discipline feels supportive rather than restrictive, because it exists to protect alignment rather than impose control. This is the stage where you no longer need to rush toward achievement, because you are already moving with intention, and movement itself has become meaningful. You understand now that growth does not require constant intensity, but steady presence, and that progress made consistently, even in small ways, compounds more reliably than sporadic bursts of effort. The quiet beginning invites patience, because you recognize that real change often occurs beneath the surface long before it becomes visible, and that impatience disrupts processes that need time to mature. You no longer fear slow progress, because direction matters more than speed, and alignment matters more than appearance. This beginning is quiet because it replaces noise with focus, confusion with clarity, and urgency with steadiness. You may not feel dramatically different immediately, yet you will notice subtle shifts in how you handle pressure, uncertainty, and distraction, realizing that growth has already begun to reshape your internal landscape. The quiet beginning is where you stop chasing motivation and start honoring discipline, because discipline remains available even when emotion fluctuates. It is where you stop seeking guarantees and start trusting process, understanding that consistency creates reliability even when outcomes are uncertain. This chapter exists to remind you that endings are often illusions, and that every conclusion simply creates space for a deeper, more intentional beginning. The map of achievement does not promise ease, perfection, or certainty, but it offers coherence, direction, and self-trust, which are far more valuable over time. As this audiobook comes to a close, there is nothing more you need to add, force, or fix in this moment, because awareness has already been planted, and growth will continue as long as you remain intentional. You are not behind, you are not late, and you are not missing anything essential, because the quiet beginning meets you exactly where you are. From here, progress does not require reinvention, but repetition, not urgency, but patience, and not noise, but clarity. The map remains with you, not as a rigid path, but as a guide you can return to whenever direction feels uncertain. And as you move forward, understand that the most powerful achievements are built quietly, through daily choices made with integrity, awareness, and consistency. This is not an ending, but a continuation that begins now, without announcement, without pressure, and without rush. This is the quiet beginning, and from here, the journey continues, guided not by fear or urgency, but by clarity, alignment, and trust. Stay on the path. As you move closer to the end of this audiobook, it is important to remember that while achievement is a personal journey, it does not have to be a lonely one, because growth becomes more sustainable when you surround your mind with ideas, voices, and reminders that reinforce clarity rather than confusion. This channel, Audiobook Sounds, Chasing Greatness, was created as a space for those who are committed to thinking deeply, moving intentionally, and building progress quietly, without the noise of comparison, pressure, or unrealistic expectations. And by choosing to stay connected here, you are choosing to regularly place your attention in an environment that supports focus, discipline, and long-term growth. If this audiobook has helped you see your path more clearly, even in a small way, I invite you to engage with the channel, subscribe, and remain part of this space, not out of obligation, but as a commitment to yourself, because the content here exists to guide your thinking when motivation fades and direction feels uncertain. Each audiobook on this channel is designed to meet you where you are, offering perspective, structure, and clarity that you can return to whenever life becomes noisy, overwhelming, or distracting, because progress is not built in moments of intensity, but through repeated exposure to the right ideas over time. By staying connected, you are not just consuming content, but reinforcing a mindset that values patience over urgency, direction over speed, and consistency over temporary excitement, which are the exact qualities required to navigate achievement without burning out or losing yourself along the way. Consider this not as a request, but as an invitation to continue walking a path that values clarity, discipline, and intentional growth, because the journey does not end with one audiobook, but evolves through continued reflection, learning, and alignment. Now, as you prepare to enter the final chapter, carry this sense of steadiness with you, knowing that you are not rushing toward an ending, but moving deeper into understanding how achievement becomes a way of living rather than a destination.